Hello, we're going to talk today about the American expansion into the Trans-Mississippi West. We're going to focus some on the events that actually happened during that period of time, but we're going to mainly focus on an issue or a concept in the historical profession called historiography. Historiography, historiography. And that is essentially the history of history. It is the story, it is the history of how the narrative has been told over time. And what we're going to look at today is how Americans saw expansion into the West during the 19th century and in how that perception of it changed in uh, in the 20th century. Now, the thing about the West is there's a certain subset or a certain set of things that happened uh, between the period, say, around 1850 and 1900 that involved the settlement of the West. And most of it was actually, pretty mundane, as we'll kind of discover here in a minute, but it was mythologized by Americans. Americans saw the conquest of the West as the playing out of the American mission to spread its ideals and its ideology and its civilization across the continent, a kind of uh, a fulfillment of the idea of manifest destiny, and so um, the theme of the American West uh, is mythologized in literature and in you know um, performing acts, performing troops like Buffalo Bill Wild West or Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and in movies. I mean, you guys probably have seen tons of the movies about the West, and they were even more prevalent when I was younger. And so what happens is that we develop this myth about what happened in the West, and because it's been so mythologized, it's hard for us to really take a clear-eyed look at what actually happened. The the thing that, and that's what we're going to be really addressing in today's lecture. But uh, what really ends up happening is that the West comes to symbolize the United States, both for Americans and for foreigners, right? So if you want to think about what is the quintessential um, image of the United States, it's the cowboy, and I'm going to show you that in a second here. The thing that we need to start off by saying is that the cowboy is not this heroic, liberty-loving, nature-loving knight of the plains. It's actually being a cowboy was actually meant to herd cattle across the countryside, and that was a very difficult job. It was something that was performed by young guys, um, and it was really kind of menial manual labor. So it's a lot like, mythologizing. If we were today mythologizing construction workers or truck drivers, it's not that that those are not honorable professions. It is that we don't really think of construction workers as being representative of our ideal and our ethos, right? So let's take a look then at a a representation of the cowboy, and I got this actually from the LA Times quite some time ago. And obviously, the date in this was in 2003, and it just occurred to me recently that this is probably really dated for you guys because it's talking about it was during the time of the United States um, contemplating the invasion of Iraq, and um, the Americans were pushing very hard for an invasion, and our allies in Europe were pushing back on it. So much so that the French were vocally against American intervention or anybody's intervention in Iraq, and the United States, people in the United States were offended by that, so that for some period of time we had freedom fries instead of French fries. But at any rate, um, so this is part of that debate that comes out of the LA Times at that period of time. And what we can see here is really two mirrors, right? And the mirrors, on the one hand, how do Americans see Americans? And that you see that there's the cowboy with he's clean cut, he's wearing a star, he's got a white hat, he is the representation of the good guy. And then on the other hand, the way the Europeans see Americans is this slovenly, uh, dirty, smoking bandit, waving his guns around and standing in a pool of blood, and wearing a black hat. So what we see then is that both Americans and Europeans think of Americans as cowboys, but a cowboy can be defined in two different ways, either as a hero or as a villain. And then in the middle of the picture, you can see George Bush, who was president at the time, um, trying to make this decision or pushing this idea of invading Iraq. The main thing to take away from this is that the cowboy essentially becomes the representation of the United States, both for Americans and for foreigners.